For more on this now, let's speak to our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us from New York. Sherwin, it has seemed to have ruffled some feathers, this decision, especially within the Russian Federation. If you are to listen there to President Vladimir Putin, who says that we will then assess the threat and see how best to respond, but also saying that it now drags NATO into the picture.
Well, it did seem quite unexpected, right? This announcement that has yet to be formally, Bongiwe, confirmed by the White House or the U.S. administration. Lots of U.S. media reporting that this has now been a decision, citing sources within the administration, but a decision coming from Biden basically 2 months before he leaves office. And in the context of Ukraine asking for these long-range weapons, these long-range missiles, for much of the last year, right? Zelensky has been to Washington, D.C. on a number of occasions, pleading for the use of these weapons, and it happens just 2 months before Biden is leaving office. So the question really is, why now, right? And one can provide some speculation that the broad narrative that we are hearing in the United States, it's to allow Ukraine a future, stronger negotiating position, because at some point, the parties are going to have to talk to each other about a ceasefire arrangement or a cessation of hostilities. But also it is seen as a response to Russia's inclusion and deployment of some 10,000 North Korean troops to parts of the front lines. We understand, particularly along in the Kursk region, where Ukraine has occupied parts of Russian territory. So the broad consensus that seems to be emerging is that Biden is acting now so as to allow Ukraine a stronger negotiating position were international pressure to move in a direction where the two parties eventually do have direct talks, which is certainly something you're hearing from the likes of the Chinese, the Brazilians, and even South Africa. All parties sitting around the table at the G20 in Rio de Janeiro today.
And certainly showing some are concerned that this move, as significant as it is for others, it may lead to a potential escalation in Ukraine.
It certainly could, right? There are more unknowns in scenario like this than there are not. But what we also do know is that we have an incoming administration in the likes of President-elect Donald Trump, who has made it very clear that his priority will be to end this war as soon as possible. He, we understand, has already had direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And so it's difficult to see an escalation in the short term that does not allow the Trump administration to come in here and assert itself on the future course of this war. What we do know from a current G7 statement that was issued by Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just ahead of this G20 summit in Brazil is that they're affirming, as the G7, that they stand in solidarity in contributing to Ukraine's fight for its sovereignty. The statement goes on to say that after 1,000 days of war, we recognize the immense suffering endured by the people of Ukraine. Despite these hardships, Ukrainians have demonstrated unmatched resilience and determination in defending their land, culture, and people. Russia remains the sole obstacle, according to the G7, to a just and lasting peace. The G7 confirms its commitment to imposing severe costs on Russia through sanctions, export controls, and effective measures. And so how does a statement like that change when Biden is not party to the G7, but Donald Trump is? And one imagines, Bongiwe, based on what we have heard from the Trump campaign, his desire to not fund this war to the extent that the Biden administration has, to end this war as quickly as possible. One imagines that a G7 statement with Donald Trump in the room will be a quite different statement completely.
And definitely, because he has been saying, during his campaign, that he wants to ensure that there's an end to this particular war. But at the same time, when you're looking at this, we do have the G20 summit that is currently underway. Some of these parties certainly do not agree on geopolitics and the positions there. So this is also likely to cause some disagreements inside there as well.
Absolutely right. I've just shared with you the G7 statement. That is one perspective that will emerge from the discussions in Rio. But what shall we make of the position of an India, of a South Africa, of a China? Russia, represented by its foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, is also around the G20 table, and they must all agree to an outcome statement that will collectively bring together the broad consensus of the G20. Right, the way you adopt these communiques is via consensus. We also understand that the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is going to, according to a Bloomberg report, present his own vision for a peace plan, a plan that is reportedly going to propose a freeze, Bongwe, in the current hostilities at the current positions. We know that this might also be a, shadow the agreement that we know that Russia and China and Russia have put forward in terms of pushing Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table. We know that that is the position of the South African government. So, these are the different permutations that will emerge at the G20. The broad consensus certainly has to be that we have to move the parties to direct negotiations. The question is, will Ukraine be satisfied with those parameters, and will the Russians be, a party to those parameters, given the escalation we might now see, given the long-range abilities that have now been afforded the Ukrainian military in this continuing war?
Big questions indeed, and we shall then wait and see what becomes the answers. But also, as you say, Trump holding a different view altogether, it does make one wonder what's in store for the future. Thank you so much for that update, Sherwin. Appreciate it. That's Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent.